We do have important breaking news for you right now. CNN has learned that former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort will surrender today in special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation. As you know, we've been talking about this morning. There was great speculation about who might be charged, and now CNN has this reporting. CNN's Evan Perez joins us with all of the breaking details. What have you learned, Evan?
Well, Addison, later today we expect that this indictment is going to be unsealed in federal court here in Washington, but Paul Manafort is planning to turn himself in to the FBI for processing and then for the court proceedings to take place later today. Again, later this morning we expect that Paul Manafort will turn himself in to the FBI and we'll learn more about the charges. At this point, we do not know the charges. They're still under seal, as we previously reported. These indictments had been approved by the grand jury last week on Friday, and we had expected that today, at least today, we'd see some court action, perhaps the indictments being unsealed and the arrest being made. So we now know that he is planning to turn himself in to the FBI. Now, we also are told that there may be at least one other indictment that will be unsealed later today. We're trying to work to figure out what that is about, and we'll tell you more when we find out.
Breaking developments in the Mueller investigation. Former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort and his business partner Rick Gates now indicted by the special counsel. The indictment contains 12 counts, including conspiracy against the United States and conspiracy to launder money. Judge Andrew Napolitano is Fox News senior judicial analyst, and we have the benefit of having you on first after this just came out. First of all, you anticipated this? Paul Manafort?
Yes, to be honest with you, yes. I didn't want to speculate because it's dangerous to speculate, over the weekend and early this morning. But it's clear that Paul Manafort was very much in their crosshairs. It's clear from the early morning raid on his home, as well as other information that the special prosecutor let slip that he was their principal target.
So the indictment is in front of you. You've already got it in a binder.
Yes.
Which means you've already read it.
Yes, I can turn the pages faster when they're in a binder.
What can you tell us? What do we need to know from this?
Here's what we need to know. The government has amassed a very sophisticated case against him, and the case shows that he and his colleagues engaged in massive fraud again, these are allegations only. He's innocent until proven guilty. In massive fraud on the United States government by failing to report income and failing to report his status as a foreign agent. What is troublesome and newsworthy is that the allegations continue to September of 2016, meaning during the time that Paul Manafort was the chair or chief executive officer, I'm not sure what the title was, of Donald Trump's campaign. He was still, according to the government, engaged in this massive money laundering fraud and was serving as an agent of a foreign government, the government of the Ukraine, without ever having informed the United States of America, as he's obliged to do under the law. The scheme to get wealthy was earning massive amounts of money from the government of Ukraine and corporations in the Ukraine owned by and controlled by the Kremlin, having that money paid to dummy offshore accounts, having those accounts purchase real estate in the United States and then borrowing money against the real estate and not reporting that money as taxes. So you can see the money went from Russia and the Ukraine to offshore accounts to real estate in the U.S. to Paul Manafort.
What caught my eye was all the zeros when I started reading this indictment, which, again, we just got, so we're just going through some of these numbers. But number 6, second page, in total more than $75 million flowed through these offshore accounts. Manafort laundered more than $18 million, which was used by him to buy property, goods, and services in the United States.
All right, so he was the legitimate campaign manager for the last popularly elected president of the Ukraine, the one that's very, very close to the people in the Kremlin. And he was paid a lot of money to do that. After that fellow was elected, Manafort stayed on as an advisor. For what purpose, we don't know. But he was paid a lot of money, a lot more money in his role as an advisor, which he funneled through these offshore accounts than he had been paid as a campaign manager. This will surely stir the pot of the speculators arguing, well, what were they paying Manafort for? What kind of influence were they paying him for? It's not clear from the indictment what he was being paid for, but it is clear that he was paid a lot of money.
What do we need to know about Bill Gates? Age 45, he's also listed here.
This is Richard Gates.
I'm sorry, Richard Gates.
Yes.
Wow, that was an interesting
stuff.
Richard Gates.
Right. Here's what we need to know. He was not involved in the campaign, as far as we can tell, but was one of Manafort's closest collaborators and business partner during this time period, which goes back to 2005 and continues up to 2016, when they were lobbying to get the job in the Ukraine, when they got the job in the Ukraine, when they made all these millions, and they funneled it all through these offshore accounts and didn't report it to the IRS.
When I asked the question, what happens now? I'll read the last line of this. The case was unsealed today after the defendants were permitted to surrender themselves to the custody of the FBI. Okay, so
sometime today they will appear before Judge Amy Berman Jackson, a tough cookie, if I may, who is the federal judge in the case. She will probably release them in their own recognizance, meaning she's not going to demand bail. Prior to that, they have been booked. That is, they've given the government their fingerprints, they've given the government their photographs, and they've given the government their passports, so they can't leave the United States and certainly can't make it to the Ukraine theoretically without passports. And then they'll walk out of the courthouse as free as they were when they entered this morning, but with some restrictions on their activity about traveling abroad.
What is this? We're going to have to conclude this here, but what does this tell you overall about the Mueller probe?
That this is the first of many dominoes to fall. That Bob Mueller is following the standard MO of federal prosecutors. You got a totem pole, you got somebody at the top of the totem pole, that's your big prize. No surprise, it's the President of the United States. You're going to indict people going up the totem pole to see if you can squeeze them, threaten their ruination by loss of liberty and loss of property, and to get them to turn evidence against the top guy. Sometimes people will make things up so that the squeezing will stop. Sometimes they'll say, I don't know anything about the president. He didn't do anything wrong. He had nothing to do with this. We'll see where it's going to go. This is the first of many steps in Bob Mueller's putting together an enormous puzzle.
And Judge Andrew Napolitano, we're going to have to get you back because we have to talk dossier, Uranium One. There's so much going on.
It's all happening at once. I'm glad you gave me the time to read this. If Hemmer were running this segment, he wouldn't even give me the time to read this.
With that, we hand it back to Mr. Bill Hemmer. Judge,
only,
thank you.
Smitty, only because I know the judge is a fast reader. Line it up. 20 minutes now before the...
Here, Rick Gates. What do we know about him, and why was he also indicted?
So he's been a long-term business associate of Paul Manafort, and according to this indictment, Gates was really instrumental in setting up some of these offshore bank accounts where he was putting that money, also allegedly helping Manafort access some of the money in those accounts. Now, it's very interesting as a prosecutorial strategy to not only indict Manafort, but also one of his associates, because a lot of this is just a game to get people to flip on one another. So perhaps if they can't get Manafort to cooperate fully, perhaps they can get Gates to cooperate against Manafort, make their case against Manafort stronger. And let me tell you, you may not want to cooperate with Robert Mueller. You may not want to testify against some of these other, even more significant people. But when there's a federal indictment with 12 counts and your name on it, there is definitely an incentive to cooperate. And it appears that that is what Mueller is getting at with these very aggressive, very public tactics that he has taken against Manafort. Not only today's very public indictment, but also the no-knock warrant that we saw earlier this summer.
Yeah, I wondered about that. I know that, some have talked about, indicting Manafort first and what that would mean moving forward. But I thought about indicting both Manafort and Rick Gates because, at least from the stuff that I've read, Rick Gates has worked very closely over a number of years with Paul Manafort. And as I understand now, Rick Gates was on the inaugural team, which is not obviously as significant as the transition team or anything along those lines, but he was able to at least survive Paul Manafort being forced to step down and remove himself from Trump's inner circle. And I wondered if this was maybe an attempt at pitting each against each other.
Absolutely. That's what I was trying to get at. I think if you can't get Manafort against some of these other high-profile campaign or White House people, perhaps you can get Gates to flip against Manafort and put more pressure on him. This is all a chess game. This is certainly not the culmination of the special counsel's work. This is all just an effort to start at the bottom.